Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, NFL Week 3. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host on this very fine football program, the one, the only Payne Insider. And Payne, it is yet another exciting week of NFL football. Teams are beginning to tell us who they are, and it's our job to figure all that fun stuff out.
College football guy didn't go with program. You actually said it properly, which I appreciate as an NFL guy.
You know, that's kind of how you have to roll around these parts. And, hey, before we get into the game...
Oh, God, here we go.
the games that we have on the schedule for this week, just wanted to get your quick takeaway from Monday night in terms of what you saw in the waning moments. We know that
I actually didn't see it.
Oh, it's a good point. I forgot about that.
So for most people that listened to the college podcast yesterday, maybe came off a little frazzled. That's what happens when your internet gets zapped 4 minutes before kickoff on Monday. I did go back and watch a little bit of it. We're going to talk about Atlanta later in this podcast with the Sunday night breakdown, so I can get to a little bit of the changes that the Falcons made offensively rather than double up there. But certainly from a Philadelphia perspective, it looks a lot different when A.J. Brown is not out there. Certainly got the ground game going with Hurts and Barkley, and I thought, you kind of knew going in it was going to be a grinder of a game, that Philadelphia didn't necessarily believe in Atlanta's offense or the version of Atlanta's offense they saw in film. And offensively, they were going to adhere to a very conservative game plan, using Hurts' leg, using Barkley's legs. Heck, you don't want to do it this early in the season, but Barkley could have had 40 touches in that game if they wanted to. They could have ran Jalen Hurts 15 times, and they probably come out the other side a winner. Dallas Goedert had a very tough matchup going with that safety duo in Atlanta, so that was going to be a matchup that wasn't going to be overly fruitful for him when you think about Simmons and Bates. So there wasn't a ton of options in the throw game. I mean, what Britton Covey have? 6 catches for like
23 yards. Felt like
yards.
I was watching Utah football back in the day.
So you better as a Utah punt returner than an Eagles receiver. So it looks a little clunky on undermanned for the Eagles. Certainly made some mistakes in the opener against Green Bay. Followed it up with an undermanned performance. A.J. Brown is the heartbeat of that offense because he allows you to do so many things, right? If teams want to play man coverage, he is the ultimate man beater. And so you're going to get zone, which Atlanta uses a ton of, and Jalen Hurts has not been as good against zone. And it was the reason we saw that total dip a bunch. It's the reason we saw the Falcons catch steam. In saying that, the Eagles could have easily won that game. So it'll be interesting to see if they bounce back here against a very, very hot Saints team. And we'll talk about that game a little bit as well. So without tipping the hand too much and ruining some of those breakdowns, I'm ready to move on past Thursday night.
Let's do it. Let's get let's get into Thursday night's game where it's New England on the road taking on a divisional foe.
Monday night, rather. Jesus.
Yeah, it's okay. I knew what you were getting at. It all blends together this time of year, to say the least. New England against the Jets. The Jets pretty much painted a 6-point favorite in this game. Total has remained largely unchanged as well at 38.5. And when we look at the way that this series has gone between two familiar foes in the AFC East, the Jets won the most recent matchup against the Patriots, snapping a 15-game losing streak in the series. When we look at how dominant New England has been, Patriots have won 8 straight games at MetLife against the Jets. Meanwhile, the Jets, they're seeking their 2 wins in the month of September for the first time since 2015. That's how long it's been since the Jets have racked up 2 wins in the first month of the season. When we look at the Jets, they haven't been favored versus the Patriots since 2011, so it has been quite some time. And if the Jets end up closing right around a touchdown, it would be the Jets' largest number that they're laying as a favorite against the Pats since 1999. But Payne, when we look at this game, New England has exceeded odds makers' expectations, depending on what number you locked in, each of the first 2 weeks. Jacoby Brissett came out with a pass-happy game plan against the Seattle Seahawks before Mike McDonald and company adjusted, but you saw a steady dose of Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson running the football, but it is a makeshift offensive line for New England at this point. Meanwhile, for the Patriots on the defensive side, Christian Gonzalez, we knew he was a top-tier cover corner, missed a good portion of his rookie campaign, but coming back, Seattle had a simple and straightforward game plan. Throw to the other side of the field where Gonzalez isn't, and if it meant getting the ball to Jackson Smith and Jigba was successful, or DK Metcalf, as both players combined for 22 catches in the game on Sunday. But here comes a Jets team that was relatively fortunate, got 17 points directly from Titans' miscues last weekend. Aaron Rodgers looking a little bit more comfortable in the offense, got the debut, so to speak, of Braylon Allen as a 1-2 punch with Breece Hall. But, what's the one matchup you're looking at to determine the outcome of the game tonight?
Well, we've seen some Jets money to this point. I'm interested to see if that sticks because the Patriots obviously have their issues. They still do. But they've been a lot more feistier than you would think, and let's see if that continues as the season moves on and losses pile up. Who knows if they do, but what was interesting to me is recently we've heard Gerard Mayo talk, and he's a defensive mind, but he's kind of emphasized wanting to pass more, and it makes sense, right? The Patriots are throwing at 9% below expectation through 2 games. He wants to fire that up a little bit because he knows the offensive line isn't getting a ton of push. It's been accumulation, and then Ramondre Stevenson being a wizard, breaking tackles. I don't know if it's possible to truly open up this pass game, right? In front of this offensive line without having 2 body bags ready for Brissett and May, I don't know if you can do that, right? Dead last, 32nd in pass block win rate. We knew the Patriots' O-line was a problem coming into the season. David Andrews is really the only guy holding his own to this point. The tackle situation is so bleak. We knew coming into the year, Mike Owenu was once an elite guard, now forced to play tackle, and that really hasn't gone well. He's been below replacement level. So you've taken one of your best linemen on the team, moved a position, and now created 2 weaknesses. And the other 3 spots past those 2 gentlemen have been horrific. And then you're looking tonight, and we'll have to monitor it. I kind of would lean towards them playing, but Andrews and Owenu are both dinged up a little bit. Could be a little reprieve tonight when you think about the Jets as well. They're certainly not going to feel bad for an injured Patriots O-line with what they've had to deal with along the defensive line. But I think about the matchup here for the Patriots, and there isn't a Trey Hendrickson or a Seattle defense that's lived in backfields for 2 weeks and is 3rd in pass rush win rate. The Jets are 25th in pass rush win rate. There's no signs of Hassan Reddick. Huff is gone. Jermaine Johnson tore his Achilles against Tennessee. JFN left in free agency. The Jets are basically relying on a situational edge rusher in Will McDonald because he can't set the edge on early downs overly well. Michael Clemens, Tack McKinley, and Braden McGregor. That is a bottom-of-the-barrel edge group that the Jets are rolling out there right now, and a lot of the pressure is basically scheme-generated. In the back, though, you do have Reed and Carter, who are on track to play, so that's a big boost for the Jets secondary if the Patriots do elect to throw more. Patriots receiver group really isn't overly threatening either. We did see Jalen Polk's snap share increase week 2. Target separation hasn't been great, only 1.2 yards. That's 145th among receivers. Hunter Henry was the target monster last week, which makes sense. You're paying the guy a bunch. He's a very good tight end. Over the years, we've discussed this where you want to attack Robert Saleh's Jets defenses over the middle. Henry would be a good option there. One thing we did see was the Jets defensive line showed to be substantially better versus Tennessee against the run after allowing 1.8 yards before first contact to Jordan Mason week 1. Similar effort needed tonight against Stevenson and Gibson. I mentioned Stevenson showing an ability to just shed tackles, and that's also been a problem for the Jets defense. 27 missed tackles in 2 games. We also have to keep tabs on C.J. Mosley, the green dot in the middle of that Jets defense. If he can't go, there are certainly some paths for the Patriots offense to have relative success tonight, and I think that's ultimately the side of the ball that dictates the cover. I do think the Patriots defensively, how they're set up and designed, at minimum going to make the Jets offense work. At some point, though, the Jets are probably going to score some points here. And so it's up to this Patriots offense to at least do their share if they're going to cover this number. What I do find interesting is, the idea of wanting to lay the Jets with all of the reports that have been coming out from that area, right? I mean, think about some of the plays that were successful against Tennessee. What was the conversation? Oh, Aaron Rodgers had to audible into that. Breece Hall just said, hey, Raj, I got a linebacker on me. Look for me here. And he just runs a wheel route and throws it. It's not a lot of
sandlot football, baby.
Nathaniel Hackett's brilliance creating some of these opportunities. And so when I think about willingly wanting to lay points in a division game, it makes me a little nervous. I don't have a horse in this race, though.
Also, third game in 10 days for the Jets. I know it hasn't exactly been the most grueling schedule of opponents.
Across the country, too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. 2 road games in the first 3, so you do wonder how this team responds. And the other thing, while it is the home opener for the Jets, and I'm sure there are plenty of Jets fans that take umbrage with this, I do wonder on a weeknight getting out to MetLife Stadium how electric the atmosphere is, but maybe Jets fans taking the day off to try and celebrate a team that has a chance to win its second game in September for the first time since 2015. From Thursday Night Football in a divisional matchup to an intriguing one on Sunday for a pair of 2-0 teams, somewhat improbably there, setting football back nearly 50 years in the process. That, of course, would be the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Los Angeles Chargers. It's the Steelers, a 1.5 to 2 point home favorite in this game. Total, the lowest that we've seen on the board so far this season. Prominent chops at 35.5. There are some 36s out there as well. The Steelers are now the third team, Payne, in the Super Bowl era to start 2-0 with 1 or fewer touchdowns, joining the 1988 Buffalo Bills and the 2000 Detroit Lions. Last year, the Steelers were the first team in NFL history with a winning record through 10 games, despite being outgained in every game. And from 2021 to 23, the Steelers became the first team in NFL history to finish with a winning record, but negative point differential in 3 straight seasons. It's good to see that a tiger can't change its stripes because the Steelers are headed in that particular direction. Meanwhile, for the Chargers, this is a team that's wanted to run the football and run the football and run the football again. When we look at Justin Herbert, has under 150 passing yards in both games this season. He had under 150 passing yards in 2 of his first 62 career games before Coach Harbaugh took over. Of course, Herbert dealing with a little bit of a lower body injury, should be available. We wonder how limited he's going to be. Chargers running the football 60% of their offensive snaps. They've played both games from a positive game script and wins against the division rival in the Raiders. And of course, last week in dismantling the Carolina Panthers, it's been all about J.K. Dobbins rediscovering that quick first step. Has the most rushing yards through 2 games of a season in Chargers history, has 3 40-yard runs so far this season. But Payne, when we look at this Chargers offense, we knew the offensive line was going to be a strength. There is a ton of draft capital that was spent there with 3 first-round picks. But can the Chargers either do enough in the passing game against this Steelers defensive front, or is it the other side of the ball where the Steelers have one offensive touchdown through 2 games where Justin Fields may have a path to getting that passing game on track against the Chargers defense that, quite frankly, hasn't been tested through the first 120 minutes of football?
This very much feels like the Spider-Man meme of just 2 of them pointing at each other. And I joked with you, we should probably just remove the scoreboard here and say first team over 54.5 rushing attempts wins.
I was going to go with first team to get to X number of rushing yards because there's a path where they may try and run it 55 times and only gain 97 yards on the ground.
Well, yeah, it'd be a tough number to reach if you're not having some success. But these teams have similar identities, right? The Steelers are passing the ball with Justin Fields 13% below expectation. And even though the Chargers have Justin Herbert 11% below expectation, not overly surprising, right? We saw Art Smith's offense in Atlanta. He was a personality fit with Tomlin. It's why Mike hired him. We knew Harbaugh's college tendencies would transfer with him to the NFL. Now we've seen Charger money roll in early in the week. And, mechanically it makes sense with a total of 35.5. It's attractive to gravitate towards the points, especially in teasers. There isn't a worry in this specific spot about, West Coast team traveling east for an early start. The Chargers stayed in North Carolina. They've been practicing at UNC Charlotte's facility, and then they'll travel to Pittsburgh ahead of Sunday. When I look at this, we know what the offenses want to do. Defensively, though, I trust the Steelers just a touch more, right? This was a unit we thought would improve year over year, discussed it in our previews. I think everyone who's texted me for fantasy football help, I've just said, target this defense because of, the schedule of offensive lines they were facing this season. Through 2 games, Pittsburgh's held running backs in check, right? Bijan Robinson averaged 0.7 yards per rush before first contact. The Williams-McLaughlin combo in Denver averaged half a yard last week before first contact. And then we just saw Bijan go absolutely nuts on the ground against the Eagles defense. So that's a very good data point for the Steelers front, who looks much healthier than it was a season ago. I know what the data suggests, and it's the Chargers' run defense is elite, right? Number 1 in run-stop win rate, number 1 in defensive rush efficiency. But Carolina's backfield is a mess. Hubbard, Sanders, Boone, they're all like, meh. Like, there's a reason Carolina drafted an early round running back. Zamir White for the Raiders, meh. Like, Pittsburgh's defense has Payne, the tougher data point.
Don't tell that to Antonio Pierce, because multiple times this week in press conference, he said Zamir White's going to get 15 to 20 touches at minimum this week, regardless of how things work. So that should be fun to watch, the Raiders offense that can't run the ball against the Chargers run defense that can't stop the run.
Yeah, well, not a Carolina run defense, you mean?
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because, and we're going far left here on a game that is not this game, but I did hear those comments. I do believe more running is interesting because they've come out throwing the ball. So it's not completely surprising he wants to run more. And what does run more mean? Is it going back to last year's rate or just a little bit more? And this is a spot where he might actually be pretty efficient running the ball against Carolina's defense. So I don't necessarily know if that's a complete negative. But getting back to this, Pittsburgh's defense, I think, has the tougher data point. To me, the Chargers' offense is also stepping up in class, right? The Raiders and the Panthers have run defenses that are ranked 27th and 28th in efficiency. And, one thing over the years we've talked about more than anybody is some of these coaching matchups, right? Sometimes there's incest, sometimes there's little quirkiness within this offensive coordinator knows this defensive coordinator. They've spent time on the same staffs. Harbaugh made Greg Roman his offensive coordinator. And Greg Roman was in Baltimore from 2017 to 2022. The last 4 seasons in Baltimore, Roman was the Ravens' offensive coordinator. Tomlin's defenses have made it extremely difficult on Roman the last 4 meetings, right? They're averaging about 15 points over those 4 meetings. Justin Herbert, you mentioned, should play, but didn't practice Wednesday with an ankle and foot issue. If you remember, Herbert came into the season with the plantar fascia injury. Again, another game that I don't have a penny on. It's very difficult because our model was screaming under here. But there aren't really any key numbers in this, like 35.5, 36 range. But the model was actually substantially lower. Always makes me a little bit nervous knowing the offenses that these two teams have played. And so there's always that idea potentially that maybe the defenses aren't as good, right? I mean, it was Kirk Cousins in his first game back learning a brand new offense. It was the rookie Bo Nix, and then obviously the data points for the Chargers defense is, Carolina, who just benched their quarterback, and the Raiders. So there's always a little bit of variance to saying, hey, maybe these defenses aren't as good as what they've shown based upon that schedule. So like when the model spit out like 33.7, I had to like do a quadruple check.
You need to jump in your time machine to the days when the Steelers and Ravens would play with totals of 30.5.
Well, I mean, this game could very easily end 16-13. And you know, I haven't gone under 35.5. Usually we're running to do that with a 2-point discrepancy. There just aren't many very key numbers within that range. And then that's basically what kept us off this game, and to this point have not joined what seems like the entire community on a Chargers teaser.
Hey, credit to the Steelers MVP through 2 games at least, which would be Chris Boswell. 8 of 8 field goals, 4 of 4 from 50-plus yards, made 3 50-yard field goals in week 1. It was the most in a game in Steelers history. And Chris Boswell joins your boy, Cammy Farbarn, for the Houston Texans, as the only kickers in NFL history to make 4-plus field goals of 50-plus yards through the first 2 weeks of the season. So at least the Steelers know they can get to midfield thereabouts as long as they're kicking into the favorable end. Chris Boswell becomes a threat from distance in a game that, to use your term, could resemble an EPL match, all things being equal.
I'm sure he loves kicking in a dome and then at altitude in Denver rather than Heinz Field, which is one of the tougher places to kick.
Guy has made a living kicking at Heinz in the past, so credit to him for going out there and taking advantage of much more favorable kicking conditions through the first 2 weeks of the season. You can follow Payne on social media at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod for all of your college football, NFL, and NASCAR playoff needs. We teased this game at the top of the show, Payne, as far as Eagles-Saints was concerned. And look, this has been the biggest mover on the board, not through key numbers, but fascinating to see when New Orleans right now, a 2.5-point favorite, heavily juiced, but to, keeping in that vein, there are some threes out there. Total on the game, 49.5. We saw this number come down before it came off the board prior to kickoff between the Eagles and Falcons, with Philadelphia a 1.5-point road favorite. Philadelphia, of course, drops that decision, and the market moves quite substantially. So before we get into the matchup that we think can determine, the win and the cover, are you at all surprised that the market has moved this much, given the Saints' offensive explosion in 2 games and the Eagles more or less stubbing their toe in the 2-minute drill defending Kirk Cousins?
It's a good question. I think ultimately that's the battle taking shape in this market, is the way the Saints are being priced this week is like a top 10 team in this league, whereas last week they were being priced like a bottom 10 team in the league. And so if you believe everything that's transpired from Clint Kubiak and that offense is going to continue happening, and this is just going to be a top 10 team in this league, then your belief is that this is fairly priced, and we've seen guys get out and lay the number below 3. For those that are still believing and using their priors, it's why we saw the Eagles grabbed at 3 flat. And so it's an interesting conversation to have, because it's more matchup-based if you're laying it, and it's more priors and price-based if you're grabbing the Eagles +3, and it's different strokes for different folks, and this is why we have battles in the marketplace all the time. And price is certainly, I think, for everyone doing this at a really, really high level, the number one factor, but certainly matchups are a massive part of that. My goal is to have both aligning. That's how you ultimately arrive at some of the best positions on the board every single week, but this one certainly has a different element to it where it's battling opinions.
And when we look at the game, of course, Philadelphia's defense hasn't exactly been a brick wall by any stretch, continuing the disturbing trend that we saw in the latter portions of last year. Part of the reason that the Eagles have the worst ATS record in the league over their last 9 games. And while we look at the Saints, and we can question the caliber of competition they faced in the Carolina Panthers Week 1, and even the Dallas Cowboys, who got exploited in a playoff game by the Green Bay Packers in the same building where they gave up 40-plus last Sunday to the Saints, New Orleans has scored on 16 of 21 drives this season, and those numbers are even better when they have all of their starters in the mix. It's the highest rate by any team through 2 games dating all the way back to 2000. Fifth team in NFL history, with 44-plus points in 3 straight games if we go back to the regular season finale last year. And Derek Carr over the span, a 17-2 touchdown interception ratio over his last 6 games. Best completion percentage and passer rating in the league since week 15 of last season. So the Saints started to build a little bit of momentum. They've carried it forward. And the Eagles, to your point, Vic Fangio, we can question everything we saw defensively in that 2-minute drill. The secondary has been okay, at least Quentin Mitchell, but this group can't generate pressure at all against an offensive line that I think we're all still waiting to figure out, is it real for the Saints, or are there some vulnerabilities that just haven't been exploited yet?
Well, I'm sure as teams catch on and figure out a better way to defend things, it'll come back to life. But I think the one thing you said was probably the thing that caught my mind, and I would agree in that New Orleans' offensive success has really been interesting because obviously the efficiency's been through the roof, but they haven't been pushed yet. Right? 30 and 35 points in the first half back-to-back games. Derek Carr's only thrown the ball 14 times in the second half because they're blowing out Carolina, who wasn't a threat to score, and Dallas wasn't keeping up. And so this efficiency has been through the roof, especially in the parts of the games that have mattered. And so you're just wondering, hey, what happens if the Saints are actually being pushed for a game throughout the full course? Clint Kubiak, to me, has just been masterful to this point, calling the offense. Derek Carr throwing with play action on 51% of dropbacks. Kubiak's used motion on over 83% of Derek Carr's dropbacks. So all of the cheat codes. And it works. It helps. It doesn't matter what type of quarterback you are. It didn't work for Bryce Young. He was too small. Didn't like when they were throwing with play action. You turn around and look, and he's so small. It didn't work for Bryce Young. But now, the Saints on this fast track in the Dome, you're getting an Eagles defense with short prep time, having played Monday night. The Eagles defense is 26th in EPA per dropback allowed, 25th in schedule adjusted pass defense. But it's not how the Saints can attack through the air, but it's also how they're being aggressive on the ground game, right? The Saints O-line moved to the Shanahan style of running outside zone scheme, and it's proven time and time again to help offensive linemen, and we kind of are seeing this, and we've seen it for years, and with the 49ers, right? They chose not to re-sign Mike McGlinchey, and it was basically just Trent Williams and 4 guys, and I know Miami's tried to mimic that with Teron Armstead and, just 4 random guys. It hasn't worked to that level of success. But where I'm going with this is that scheme helps these players. And the sample size is small. But right now, Eric McCoy and Cesar Ruiz are having career years. Fuaga has stepped in as a rookie and really contributed. Trevor Penning is at least playing to a replacement level. And he was going to be out of the league pretty soon, the way that was trending. And so all told, the Saints are second in run block win rate. It's not just what they're doing in terms of pass protection. The Eagles defense has also struggled to stop the run. 4th worst in rushing success rate allowed. So down to down, they're getting mauled a little bit. Running backs have been explosive, right? Averaging over 6.5 yards a carry. It's led to being 31st in EPA per rush allowed for that Philly defense. Alvin Kamara has looked to have regained some of that explosiveness. He's got the juice back. Game 1 against Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson, the Eagles allowed 3.9 yards per rush before first contact. We said to ourselves, numbers. Right? Kind of said to ourselves, game 1, new scheme, basically playing on ice skates with that field. Let's see what it looks like week 2. Bijan Robinson, 3.6 yards per rush before first contact. So this has been a problem. The Georgia kids in that front 7, wowzers. A little bit of a struggle bus there for that foursome. I think Kubiak, Carr, and Kamara just continue finding efficiency and some explosiveness. Now, maybe not as much in this game based upon how Fangio likes to play his secondary, keep everything in front. The Saints' ground game will have to continue to be efficient, especially when you get into those red zone areas. We've seen kind of over time with those Fangio defenses, they really hunker down in the red zone. So having that supportive ground game this year should help there. I'm not sure any extra motivation is needed other than winning and keeping the offense rolling. And this is certainly a little narrative-y. But again, one thing we do like to talk about is some of the incest and the coaching matchups and some previous history. Think back to the 2019 season Denver Broncos. John Elway had all but hired Gary Kubiak to be Denver's offensive coordinator. Vic Fangio was hired as Denver's head coach. Fangio effectively nixed the idea of bringing in Papa Kubiak due to differing ideas about the team's offensive philosophy and staffing. I am sure Clint Kubiak would love to put a number here on Vic Fangio and settle the score for Dad. Again, a little bit narrative-y, but maybe they don't let up off the gas there in the second half if this is to get out of hand like they have in the last 2 weeks.
Hey, all those storylines add up. I mean, it can give you an intangible edge here or there. You try and do everything you can to try and encapsulate that in your handicapping. You mentioned some of the Georgia boys struggling for Philadelphia defensively. Well, their offseason acquisition of Bryce Huff didn't exactly pay dividends on Monday night either. He led all pass rushers in snaps and had another disappointing outing. Heard one NFL analyst describe it as a ghost performance. He was out there in theory, but there was no reflection of him on the stat sheet with no tackles, quarterback sacks, or quarterback hits for that defensive front as Philadelphia continues to struggle generating a pass rush and making opposing quarterbacks feel uncomfortable in the pocket. In the afternoon, Payne, this was clearly going to be the marquee game of the day, at least you were led to believe, but it takes on a very different tenor when the Ravens go on the road to Dallas to take on the Cowboys, given the fact that the Ravens are now staring down the barrel of an 0-2 start. Meanwhile, the Dallas Cowboys will look to bounce back after a disappointing performance against the aforementioned New Orleans Saints. And if you're a glass half full guy for the Ravens, you can go, well, you know what? They were about a quarter of an inch from beating the Kansas City Chiefs in the opener, and they were another fourth quarter collapse from knocking off the Raiders and being 2-0. Unfortunately, that's not the world Ravens fans get to live in. And last Sunday continued a disturbing and emerging trend. Since 2020, the Ravens have 8 home losses after leading by 10-plus points at any point in the game, 3 more than any other team in the league. That was their 11th loss when leading by 7-plus in the fourth quarter during that same span. And when we look at the trending of kickers across the league, the Ravens used to think they had their secret weapon in Justin Tucker. He's been the only kicker that's struggled from 50-plus yards. Meanwhile, Brandon Aubrey recently set the record for most consecutive 50-yard makes to begin an NFL career. When we look at Lamar Jackson, we know about him in bounce-back spots. We've seen how prolific he can be as a favorite of 3 points or less. And against NFC teams, look, the Baltimore Ravens have been a straight-up machine in terms of racking up victories. When you look at the Ravens' offense against the Cowboys' defense that was gashed a week ago, Cowboys banged up. We're not quite sure exactly who may or may not be out there for this team defensively, but can the Ravens get back to what they do best, knowing that they still have a bevy of questions that have to get answered along the offensive line?
Feels like they're still figuring that out a little bit on offense. What I did notice was the Ravens' pass protection was better in week 2, even against a Crosby and Wilkins front. And I think there's some variance to this side of the ball because of that. When Lamar Jackson's had time, Todd Monken has him pushing the ball further downfield, which is something we kind of pounded the table for, especially if you're going to think about that zone read concept in the run game. You want to be able to at least stress the ball downfield when you do throw it, so defenses aren't just squatting, right, and loading the box and effectively turning your offense into a phone booth. When the Cowboys don't get pressure, they are a bottom feeder pass defense. So this has a boom or bust element that can very much be drive to drive dependent. If Micah Parsons is able to disrupt the drive, it's probably going to be something that ends the drive. If you can't get pressure, you're looking at a secondary that without Deron Bland and Trayvon Diggs, who missed practice with a foot injury on Wednesday, could very much be vulnerable here. The Ravens and Saints use very similar concepts with multi-tight ends and multi-running back sets. I think it would be very wise for Todd Monken to have Lamar throw with more play action in this specific spot, only using it 19% of the time through 2 games. Lamar is, you got to help everybody. It doesn't matter how talented the quarterback is. The goal is to put these players in the best positions possible. And right now, the Cowboys defense, 31st in yards per pass attempt allowed when the opponent throws with play action, 28th in EPA. So I would like to see Lamar have that play action rate be much higher this week. The Cowboys have also used too high coverage at the 9th highest rate. Again, I think they're, it's a brand new scheme with Zimmer, right? Quinn was a little bit more aggressive. Lamar has been much better against that look this season. Also thinking about the run game here. Defensive tackle Jordan Phillips was put on IR. Maze Smith, who you kind of hinted at, had his back lock up at practice on Wednesday. So let's see if he's going to be available come Sunday. The interior of that Cowboys defensive line was a question mark coming into the season, right? And now Dallas 31st in schedule-adjusted run defense, below average and run-stop win rate. So if the Ravens are able to get that ground game going, throw some play action off of that, I really think they're going to have some success on offense. I'm also intrigued to see what Mike Zimmer does with Micah Parsons. If you remember, the conversation coming into the season this year was Micah was losing a little bit of weight. They felt good about their depth at edge. They wanted to move Micah around a little bit, play him at linebacker some, have him come off the edge in like this blitzing manner, following behind the defensive ends that are there. They weren't going to put him at defensive end as much. What does that look like this week? Are they going to use Parsons as a spy on Lamar? Because that certainly might shut that element down, but it opens up a slew of other things. And you have a guy who now suddenly has to think and not play instinctually. I don't know if that's the move you necessarily want. So I think the Ravens have the ability, if they protect in the manner they did last week, to have some real success here, not only on the ground, but using some play action here would be very, very smart in the spot of Todd Monken.
Dallas last week, even in comeback mode, I think the best word I could use to describe the performance was underwhelming. Watching them in a situation where all they had to do is throw it to get back in the game, and of course it's an oversimplified approach. But Dak Prescott, multiple interceptions, had just one game last season where he had 2+ picks. When you look at the Dallas Cowboys ground game, there's none to speak of so far this season. Just a 37% success rate, trying to figure out exactly who's going to be their bell cow back. I don't think they have one on the roster. When you look at, Rico Dowdle, Ezekiel Elliott, Deuce Vaughn, and, maybe Dalvin Cook is the great savior waiting in the wings to try and salvage this ground attack that's 26 in the league, averaging just 3.7 yards per carry. As far as the Ravens are concerned, defensively, they've been stout against the run through the first 2 games of the season. We know up front that's where they can hold their own, but the questions start to emerge in the back end. Nate Wiggins missed the game against the Raiders because of a concussion suffered in a car crash. We're not sure about his availability. Kyle Hamilton banged up as well, but the Cowboys not without their own issues on the offensive side. Jake Ferguson missed week 2. CeeDee Lamb missed practice on Wednesday, and even Brandon Cooks was limited on the initial practice report. So fascinating to see if the Cowboys can bounce back offensively against the Ravens defense that gave up plenty of explosive plays of the 20-plus yard variety in the second half against Gardner Minshew last Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, Dallas to me is giving me a little bit of a tougher time to gauge because we came into the season thinking this unit would be down, right? We weren't as high on the offensive line. We weren't sure if there was going to be a ground game to speak of. Zeke probably is more of a power runner, right? So you're going to be efficient in those 3rd and 1s, 4th and 1s at the goal line. But he really wasn't going to bring much juice anywhere else, and you're seeing that. Now he doesn't have a ton of attempts, 16, but he hasn't forced a missed tackle yet. He doesn't have a 10-plus yard run yet. Rico Dowdle has never been that guy. He's forced 1 missed tackle on 15 attempts. You're looking at a running back duo, which is dead last in the league in elusiveness. And so it's really become a game where it's on Dak Prescott in this throw game, and it's basically just CeeDee Lamb, who sat out most of camp. Brandon Cooks hasn't really regained some of his form. Let's just put it that way. I don't necessarily loved the play caller all the time in Mike McCarthy. I don't know what we're going to 100% get from this Cowboys offense. I think back to the Browns, and you're like, hey, they hung 30-plus points. It was the Browns' defense at home. And then you start to dig into a lot of short fields for Aubrey to bang home 50-plus yarders. It was a special teams touchdown. Last week, I guess where I'm going with this is, and I wasn't sure I was going to share it. I'll share it. I think Dallas maybe got caught off guard offensively. We think about Dennis Allen as this guy who's going to play a bunch of man coverage. The Saints completely changed. They did not respect the Cowboys' run game. So they used a ton of light boxes. They used, drop 8 coverage 83% of the time. They didn't blitz and threw zone behind it. Only 13% man coverage in the first half. And so it might have caught Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys off course, right? And that's maybe the saving grace here. When I think about the Ravens defense, certainly that's a unit that we knew was going to be down this year. We mentioned the brain drain on Monday. They're struggling right now to get pressure. And when they try to get pressure with the blitz, they have not gotten home. And so you think about this Ravens defense in totality. When they do not get pressure, they're allowing an 83% completion rate. The Ravens have also played a lot of too high. They've used it at the 4th highest rate. Dak Prescott has been substantially better against too high than man coverage, basically because he's only got one man beater out there. Ferguson at tight end, let's see. I know he was back at practice, but that injury is usually a multi-week injury, so if he tries to be a tough guy and get out there, I don't know how effective he's going to be. But then, I also look at the Cowboys last week, right? And even though they were probably a little caught off guard with some of the changes that Dennis Allen had, didn't punt their first 7 possessions. Only mustered 19 points. It's also Mike McCarthy having to find a way to be a little bit better in the red zone. We knew that was an issue at the early portion of last season. Some sharp people got to him and shared some information last year, and that red zone offense started to take off a little bit.
Funny how that works. You surround yourself with smart people that can tell you what you're doing wrong, and suddenly the results on the field start to yield fruit.
Similar help from that faction has not been requested to this point, and so we'll see if that improves. Have to be better in the red zone this week. That's kind of where I'm at with this game right now. I think there's some interesting stuff happening in the market, and there's certainly potentially 2 ideas, right? When you think about this game overarching, and we joke around, I want to call it the fossil philosophy, but 0-2 Ravens season on the line, right? Dallas Cowboys defense embarrassed. If you read all the quotes from Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs, like not enough energy and effort, so you're going to expect that on defense. And we're starting to see the market trickle down a little bit, even some 47.5 this morning. Part of it started when CeeDee Lamb was not practicing yesterday. I'm told that's not a thing, just a kind of a rest day. But then you start to look at some of these matchups, and good golly, it's interesting. Now the price was a touch high, right? If you look back last year when you had 2 top 10 offenses on the field, it usually came with a total of averaging around the mid 47s, 47.5. So this one came higher, and right now there's only 1 top 10 offense in this matchup, and it's the Ravens, and it's a fringe top 10 unit through 2 data points. So I'm interested to see where this ultimately goes. To this point, don't have anything, but certainly mulling a couple things here.
And when we look at the Ravens again, for Ravens fans that are out there not used to being 0-2 through the first 2 weeks of the season, the Ravens are now the first 0-2 team to lead the NFL in total offense through week 2 since 1994, when the Patriots accomplished that feat. And when we look at the Ravens overall, 4th best total yardage differential of plus 222 by an 0-2 team in the Super Bowl era. So maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but you, of course, draw an ornery bunch of Dallas Cowboys who were embarrassed in their own building for the second time in as many games, going back to last year when they were dispatched by the Green Bay Packers in the playoffs. And the last game we have, in terms of a big game breakdown for today's show, is the Sunday Nighter in Atlanta, and a fascinating matchup to try and figure out what we're going to get from these two teams. Kansas City, a 3.5-point favorite painted across the board with this total that is pretty much ubiquitous as well, 46.5 being the number. With the exception of Isaiah Pacheco, which is a big loss, missing substantial time with that broken fibula. The Chiefs come in as a relatively healthy bunch on their early week injury report. Meanwhile, for the Atlanta Falcons, we'll see how they can respond to a short week as well. As far as the Kansas City Chiefs, are the only 2-0 team in the league with a negative turnover margin at -2, the only 2-0 team that's been outgained in both contests as well. And when we look at what Kansas City did last week against the Cincinnati Bengals, Patrick Mahomes finished with 151 passing yards and 2 interceptions. First game of his career with under 200 yards passing and 2 interceptions. When we look at Mahomes, he's bounced back after lackluster passing performances, going 6-0 straight up in a game following a performance where he doesn't throw for 200+. The big question for the Kansas City Chiefs, Payne, who will be the bell cow back? Carson Steele, Samaje Perine. Will we get a dose of Kareem Hunt, who is signed this week? But as far as the receiving room for Kansas City as well, Rashee Rice has clearly emerged as the alpha. Travis Kelce, now 5 straight regular season games with under 50 receiving yards, 4 catches for 39 yards through the first 2 games of the season. And Xavier Worthy, that was all the buzz in the opener, held in check by Cincinnati. But the offensive line, maybe they get a breath of fresh air. There's no Trey Hendrickson that they have to worry about this week against a Falcons defense that, look, is good from the back on in terms of their safety position. They have a couple of plus corners, but in terms of creating a consistent rush, may be able to have their hands full if Kansas City puts the ball and their trust in Patrick Mahomes.
I have no idea where I'm going right now. I thought we transitioned to women in Miami there. Is that where you were going with that? But you then used a $23 Scrabble word at the beginning of
I try and keep people on their toes as best I can. Make this an educational program.
I think we're talking about the Chiefs offense here.
I know you get a little ADD when I start to ramble. Yes, Chiefs offense against the Falcons defense is the overarching theme before we get to the other side of the ball.
What we envisioned the Chiefs offense to be, it hasn't been right now. The Ravens defense has taken a step back, but there's still some decent pieces there. And Lou Anarumo is notorious for making Reed and Mahomes work a little bit. He just makes those guys earn their food, always has. Hollywood Brown not being in the fold really, dashes some of the Chiefs' plans they had coming into this season. Losing Pacheco is a significant blow. The Chiefs' offense has looked a lot like it did a season ago with short throws. In this spot, though, Reed and Mahomes know what they'll be getting, right? That the Falcons live in zone, specifically cover 3. I mentioned on Monday when we were breaking down that Eagles game, the low rates of man coverage for Atlanta. And you can go back to the first time we discussed Rashee Rice on this podcast when he was drafted. We discussed his ability to feast against zone. He was the number 2 receiver from that receiver class in EPA against zone at SMU. It's continued in the NFL. 30% target share against zone coverage this season, averaging over 3.3 yards per route run in the NFL against cover 3 zone for his career, which is Atlanta's most common coverage type. I'm interested to see who Andy Reid goes with at left tackle. Is it Kingsley or is it Wanya Morris? Trey Hendrickson is a tough matchup for a young kid, right? He's so strong and has great technique. You'd hate for one game to determine what took 4 months to decide heading into the season, right? The good part here is whether it's Kingsley or Morris, Atlanta's dead last, 32nd in pass rush win rate. So Mahomes should have more time to hit some of those holes in that Falcon zone. The Chiefs' running back situation is probably going to be by committee. Carson Steele is certainly an interesting option as a pure runner, probably the best the Chiefs have right now, right? Kareem Hunt got added. He's familiar with the system. I don't know what he is. He certainly wasn't great last season, although he was battling through some injuries, as was the Browns' offensive line. Perine probably gets the third down work, but which guy is going to take the opportunity and run with it? And Carson Steele had a pretty large fumble around midfield last week. Now, I don't think that's going to deter Andy from using him, but we want to see a little bit more from Carson Steele, certainly from an upside perspective. Steele has that when you look at the other two gentlemen in that room. He has forced 4 missed tackles on just 9 attempts. Just got to hold on to the ball. Atlanta has a much easier challenge this week in terms of that run game, right? It's not as multiple as Philadelphia with that zone read with Barkley and Hurts. If you only focus on running back runs, the Falcons have allowed just 32% of runs to grade successful, so they've been good when it's just this traditional handoff to a running back. This is just an interesting matchup with the Chiefs having to really kind of grind out their offense again unless Xavier Worthy just takes a massive step. I know that debut was pretty wild where he scores 2 touchdowns on 3 touches. Probably not a sustainable number there.
You sure that's not sustainable to score 2 touchdowns on 3 touches?
But in terms of like getting him fully integrated into the pass offense, that's something that's gonna need to be sped up a little bit more, right? You have to expedite that with Hollywood Brown now on the mend. And I don't know if it's going to come in week 3. Would certainly be a nice time for that to happen so this offense can be a little bit more explosive, get Mahomes' depth of target up a little bit. But certainly, right, I mean, we saw Kelsey come out this week, say, hey, he's played like crap the first 2 games. It's not necessarily a great matchup with that safety tandem I mentioned with Bates and Simmons, but certainly need to get Kelsey a little bit more involved here as well.
Well, if we mention tight ends and Kansas City getting theirs involved, you would have to think for the Falcons, freeing Kyle Pitts should be at the top of their priority list this week, given what Kansas City hasn't done against tight ends so far this season, highlighted by Mike Gesicki, 7 catches for 91 yards, a rocking chair winner for all the Bet the Board newsletter readers and subscribers there. Over 19.5 cashed in the first 5 minutes of that game. Eric All had a day, 4 catches, 32 yards. Drew Sample got involved, 3 for 28. Going back to week 1, Isaiah Likely, 9 catches for 111 yards. In total, the Chiefs have allowed 25 receptions on 30 targets to opposing tight ends as their linebackers have continued to struggle in coverage. Here comes the Falcons offense that's converting third downs at a 22.2% clip. Kirk Cousins looked better last week against the Eagles, but I'm not sure the narrative would be that positive if he doesn't put together that drive to win the game where he goes 5 of 6 for 70 yards, where he faced no pressure, and it looked like he had gaping windows the size of the Grand Canyon to throw into on the boundary. As far as the weapons for the Falcons, look, Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson have provided a nice 1-2 combo in the backfield. We can see a chemistry starting to build between Kirk Cousins and the only speed and separator that Atlanta has offensively in Darnell Mooney. We know Drake London is a bigger, more physical target in that particular regard, and an offensive line that has to make sure that they can slow down Chris Jones up front to give Kirk Cousins time to step into his throws. When we look at the Falcons offense on a short week against the Chiefs defense playing on a faster track, what are you most interested to see unfold Sunday night at Mercedes-Benz?
So I think the first thing you have to do is give a little kudos to Zach Robinson and that new offensive staff in Atlanta, because they heard what was being said and they popped on the film and self-scouted themselves and I think comprehended how predictable things were in that opener against Pittsburgh, and they made some necessary adjustments from game 1 to Monday night against the Eagles. Now, it helps when you're stepping down in class from Pittsburgh's defense to the Eagles, but we did see Cousins' shotgun and pistol rates decrease nearly 45%. Play action was something Zach Robinson went to on 28% of Kirk's dropbacks after not using it a single time against Pittsburgh. And, whether Atlanta was dropping back to pass or letting Bijan cook, there was efficiency, right? And it was even happening in the first half, even though the points weren't piling up on the scoreboard. Atlanta finished week 2 5th in EPA per play, 3rd in dropback success rate. Cousins appeared visibly, more comfortable in the pocket to where he was willing to hold on to the ball. If you look week 1, Kirk was kind of hot potatoing it a little bit. Week 2, he held on to the ball for more than 2.9 seconds looking to make plays downfield. And I know you referenced Philadelphia's non-existent pass rush, but it was kind of a weirdness with Vic Fangio in that he was rushing 4 and not having success. And then he would send the entire house and Kirk would get it out quickly. But when they were sending 5-man pressures, they were actually making Kirk uncomfortable. And so maybe that's something Spags does here, right? We know Spags likes to blitz. We don't need to send the entire house. Just a 5-man rush will suffice here. I've mentioned, right, the Chiefs needing another pass rusher. and how they miss Charles Omenihu. Right now, 31st in pass rush win rate through 2 games for that Chiefs defensive line. And I hate when Spags moves Chris Jones further away from the ball to the edge on clear passing downs. It just drives me bonkers. So I think Cousins should have some time in the pocket. I'm interested to see the matchups outside, right? Joshua Williams for the Chiefs hasn't carried over that late season surge from 2023 to 2024. But he's 6'3" with long arms, wants to be physical. Drake London's depth of target has shrunk in Zach Robinson's offense. Jalen Watson, another long corner. As a team, the Chiefs have done a fantastic job covering receivers, top 5 in yards per target allowed. I'm interested to see what you hinted at, right? We all watched Thursday Night Football and saw Likely go nuts. We all watched the tight ends for Cincinnati go ham last week. I don't want to say the Chiefs are able to cover tight ends, but I also think Spags has made it clear he wants to remove the opposing team's best weapon. In week 1, Mark Andrews was doubled and bracketed more than any game he's played since 2021. So it opened things up for Likely. They just didn't really care to cover him. Jamar Chase was held to 0.9 yards per route run by Spags. So Spags has basically put an emphasis on making the other guys beat his defense. I don't think Ray McLeod is more than a special teams player, but he shockingly leads the Falcons in targets. Pitts, who I think you're kind of hinting at, was supposed to break out this season. He's been kept more in line to help with blocking, which is like similar to what this style of offense with Robinson and previously and currently with McVay in Los Angeles, it's just kind of what he does. And so similar to London, like Pitts's target depth has shrunk because he's not out there, lining up out wide as a receiver or in the slot. He's been in line a bunch more. I want to see how things look as we get more data, but it very much feels like a find the open man type of offense right now for Atlanta. And the Chiefs are basically removing top tier weapons and forcing the ancillary weapons to beat them. And so it kind of creates some variance in terms of like who's going to be the guy for the Falcons in this matchup from like a DFS or a prop perspective.
You would think, if the Chiefs can do anything within their power, take away Bijan Robinson and make somebody else beat you, knowing that he has been one of the more dynamic playmakers in Atlanta, to their credit, is doing everything they can to get him touches both as a runner and a receiver coming out of the backfield. But no doubt should be a fascinating chess match to see unfold as the Atlanta Falcons have to feel fortunate they're sitting at 1-1 and a chance with a modest upset on Sunday night to be 2-1. And not allow anybody else in that NFC South to create some separation with the Bucs 2-0 and the Saints 2-0 as well. Meanwhile, for Kansas City, we'll see what this offense looks like, making some of those tweaks and adjustments that you highlighted, given that they're a little bit more banged up at the skill position spot than they expected to be only 2 weeks into the season. You can follow Payne on social media, Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, for all things podcast related, be sure to follow at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, I want to peel back the curtain before we get to a best bet on this week's program. Week one we went with the Tennessee Titans, and we know how that game unfolded. Last week, we give out the teaser, and the Lions, an uncharacteristically poor performance, going 1 for 7 when they got into the red zone. And one of the other games that we had toyed with before we elected to go in a different direction was the Giants, plus the points. I'm not sure if our listeners feel better losing the teaser, or if they would have felt better losing the Giants, knowing that would have invented history the same way the Tennessee Titans did week 1. It has been a challenge, to say the least, when it comes to just getting normal variance for our best bets in the early portion of the NFL season.
Yes, I think we discussed that on Monday, but yeah, we did not peel behind the curtain, and the other option was certainly the Giants, who scored 3 touchdowns, gave up none, and lost the game. So
because their kicker went on IR after he was on the injury report on Saturday with a hamstring, and the Giants didn't think to have a secondary option active. But I digress.
This will probably make some people throw up. It's a game that we kind of on Sunday night just said, hey, going to grab a price here and figure out what to do with it later. This has the makings of having fantastic market entry or potentially not the best, but not something that's going to completely hinder you. Listen, we're going to go with 4-6-4. Back to the well with the Tennessee Titans. We'll lay the 1.5 here. If you are someone who thinks that Jordan Love is going to play, maybe you go a half position and then add a half position after the market resets because, the data suggests rushing these quarterbacks back well before they're supposed to be has not led to any great shakes. If it is Malik Willis, I think as much as we respect LaFleur, it's going to be very difficult to find that next thing. Certainly last week in the first half, Green Bay's offense was good, coming up with this game plan of the two-man run game. But now that we've seen it, it makes things a little bit more difficult to run that style back against a Tennessee defense, who I think probably hasn't defended the run as well as you would think with Sweat and Simmons inside. But I think it's difficult for Green Bay to find offense here for a second week with Malik Willis. We also have Denard Robinson. We've talked about him a couple times. He's willing to disguise coverages. He's going to make Malik Willis think a little bit more in terms of strategy and scheme, right? When you think last week against the Colts in a Gus Bradley system, he just rolls out cover 3 zone and says, hey, this is what we do. This is what we're going to be. Within that, Malik also catches a break with Juju Brents, the Colts' top corner, being down. DeForest Buckner leaves that Colts game. He has been basically the barometer to success for that Colts defense. If you remember when things got taken over, right, they need a 3-tech in the middle for that defense to be functional. And so him out was a massive loss. So I just think it's much more difficult the second go-around finding something that Malik Willis can be competent doing and probably not catching Tennessee off guard. And then I think about this from a market standpoint. Tennessee could very easily be 2-0, and they're being priced like the 0-2 team that the standings column says they are. And so we just don't believe that to necessarily be true. Should find success, right? We've talked about Jeff Hafley coming in, and I think eventually he will get it figured out with that talent, but Green Bay's defense has been very porous. And I know you'll look at the scoreboard and see 10 points last week, but the Colts were able to run the ball on the ground, which I think Tennessee can have success doing with Pollard. And it was basically just Anthony Richardson throwing up on himself with 3 interceptions inside of plus territory. And I know Will Levis is certainly prone to some mistakes, but I do think he could have some relative success here. So Green Bay's defensive front just has not been very good despite all of the talent. They are bottom 3 right now in both pass rush win rate and run stop win rate. And I think it makes some sense here as we're recording this on Thursday morning to lay Tennessee minus 1.5. If Jordan Love doesn't end up playing, you're going to see this game close at the key of 3. I think if he does play, you're going to see that initial move through 0, and then you're going to see professional bettors double down at Tennessee plus 1.5 or plus 2, and it'll eventually close pick to where we're not getting decimated by CLV here if Jordan Love attempts to go, Todd.
Yeah, no, able to add to the position with that being the case for a number that was available on Sunday. One thing I do have to bust your balls on, because I know you're a college football guy through and through. If Denard Robinson is the defensive coordinator for the Titans,
Denard Wilson,
we may have some problems. I don't feel as good about the bet if it's Denard Robinson
Shoelace.
out there as DC this weekend.
Nickname? What was his
Shoelace.
Nickname? Shoelace, that was it. Yeah, Denard Wilson.
But Shoelace, made better decisions as a quarterback than Will Levis has through the first 2 weeks. So you have to hope that the tongue lashing from Coach Callahan will have Will a little bit smarter with the football. If there's not a play to be made, take the sack, go down. Don't give up that momentum-changing play against the Green Bay team that, in my opinion, will be a little bit limited with most likely Malik Willis under center.
I think that's right. In markets, there's speculation. And so you feel good that I think if you talked to LaFleur and said, hey, we are 0-1. Our quarterback just went down. We have Malik Willis for 2 more games before we face a Vikings team in division week 4. Can we just go 1-1 somehow? And so you got that win with Malik Willis. I think it makes sense from a longevity standpoint of where the Packers want to go this season, right? It's not winning a week 3 game. It's being a player in that division, making the playoffs and making a little bit of a run. And so if you bring Love back and he's 75% and he re-injures it, then your season's done at that point. So division game on deck, I think it makes sense to speculate a little bit that he might not play. And if not, I think, again, we're not going to lose a ton of value through the 0.
Yep, and I think it's also good when we look at some of the betting markets, they can often tell a storyline. Amid the speculation of Jordan Love, you haven't seen that much movement for this game, but where you have seen a lot of movement is the game next week for the Green Bay Packers against the Minnesota Vikings, a major showdown within the division. We saw a look-ahead number open with Minnesota minus 2.5. Love returned to practice on Wednesday. That game took more money than the game this week, as you've now seen Green Bay move to a 2.5, even as much as a 3.5-point home favorite. So if the betting market is telling us anything, speculation is that Jordan Love will be back under center sooner rather than later, but that sooner will not be this coming Sunday.
Yeah. Plus, it's the asymmetric risk game.
Yep.
Right? You want to lay 1.5. If it gets to 3, right, that's a massive key number. If it goes against you and you know it's 1.5 the other way, not as critical.
No doubt about it. It is all taking advantage of what's out there at your disposal. Anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners before we wish them the best of luck for NFL Week 3?
No, I got to tell you, that felt a little bit better. I have no idea how it sounded, but coming into this podcast on like 3 hours of sleep, I was like, boy, this could be a brutal one.
We got to get your internet.
But I think
we got to get
okay.
your internet up to snuff.
It's up, and you'd be shocked. A little tip there, and I'm suddenly getting like double what I'm paying for. But there's so many storms that are going down in South Florida, and apparently just zapped the internet. And because it happened so late, there wasn't really anybody to talk to and get out here in a normal time. So basically, it was without internet on Tuesday and yesterday morning a little bit.
Here
we are. We're back up and running.
For a man of your clout and stature, we may have to get you.
There was no one to call and
no. Hey,
is where I was going.
Let me finish my thought. There have to be more than one internet provider in South Florida, so we may have to get you multiple services that you have proper backups in place for these kind of unfortunate situations. Because a day loss for you, in productivity, you could pay for internet for 6 to 8 months and be just fine.
I went somewhere which had internet. And it was a lucrative trip, so it ended up going. So
you didn't go to a coffee shop, is what you're telling our listeners.
That is accurate. But I met the gentleman yesterday, and tipped him well, and then he gave me his number. So we'll be going outside the system here, moving forward if this is ever a problem again.
Hey, it always pays to have a guy on speed dial to fix all the problems and the tools of the trade that we need to be successful in this occupation. Best of luck for all of you, our loyal Bet the Board listeners, with whatever investments you choose to make. Most importantly, with a Tennessee Titans minus 1.5 ticket in that portfolio come Sunday afternoon, we will see you at
We hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Bet the Board. Make sure you follow Todd and Payne on X. Todd is at Todd Fuhrman. That's TODDFUHRMAN. And Payne is at Payne Insider. That's PAYNEINSIDER. Don't forget, our weekly newsletter comes with an additional best bet. Have that delivered to your inbox by clicking the link atop the podcast show notes. And most importantly, subscribe and download Bet the Board. We're on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Wondery, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and all your other major platforms.